Hello, everyone. Welcome to NFL Week 11 Inside the Lab. I am Brian. I'm here joined with Matthew and Ian, as I am every week. And we're going to run through all of the injury updates. Of course, we'll have to talk about some of these weather situations as well. Definitely some windy games that could affect how these games are going to be played, the DFS players in those games, obviously. And then we'll spend the last couple minutes of each show answering user questions. So feel free to throw those into the chat and we'll grab them at the end of the show. All right, guys, let's hop in. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we can hop right into here. Okay. All right, that sounds good. All right, so first let's start with, I think, the news that was a little surprising over the last day. We got a hint of this was going to happen. And this morning confirmed that Sterling Shepard is out for the New York Giants. Matt, you called him a chalk lock in your wide receiver breakdown piece. So obviously a big deal in this slate that the guy with the highest ownership now is not going to play. What does it do for this offense and what does it do for the slate?
Yeah, it really changes the offense, and then also the weather consideration is something that people will take into account. But I think it basically means that we're going to see the Evan Ingram that we saw a few weeks ago, where he is basically the only guy in that offense getting funneled targets. And then you have some mix of Roger Lewis and Tavares King on the outside as wide receivers, Travis Rudolph playing sort of like slot receiver, tight end. It's pretty ugly all the way around. But Evan Ingram is going to be the guy that if anyone is looking to stack and then run it back, he will be the guy that they're running it back with.
Yeah, so obviously this game has some bad wind, it looks like in New York. Jonathan Bales actually tweeted out some stats from our trends tool that talked about production from each position. Definitely it affects quarterbacks and wide receivers the most, high wins, sustained wins. Running backs actually got a little bit of a boost, we would assume probably because of extra volume. But tight ends actually were not that affected. Ian, do you think that's just because some of the short targets? And what are your thoughts on Ingram without Sterling Shepard?
Yeah, I think that certainly has something to do with it. But I mean, in Ingram's case, I'm not saying we should necessarily treat him like a wide receiver, but I mean, he's one of the more explosive and thinner, I think, tight ends you'll see in the league at this point in his career. But I think Freeman said it best. The important thing is that we do have a really good idea of where Manning will be going with his targets this season. When Beckham, Brandon Marshall, and Shepard have been out, because we've had a few games of that, it has been Evan Ingram with the overwhelming majority of the target share with Roger Lewis in second. So, definitely need to worry about the wins. But I think you're right, Brian, in that maybe Ingram's shorter targets make it less of a factor than it might otherwise be.
For sure. All right, let's keep on moving here. Let's go to the Jaguars. Talk about Leonard Fournette. Questionable to play for a little while, but it looks like he is going to give it a go. But Ian, are you worried about like his effectiveness? Obviously, the Browns we know are somewhat of a funnel defense toward the pass. They are pretty stout against the run, not so stout against the pass. But the Jaguars love to run. But are you concerned about how good Leonard Fournette could be with this injury?
That's definitely part of it, man. He seemed like he was getting over this ankle injury after he was practicing to start the week. But, to go from a limited practice to a Friday DNP is definitely concerning. It's good he's going to suit up and play. Chris Ivory is expected to have limited snaps. So, we are expecting Fournette to still be the guy in early downs. But as we saw last week, Yeldon is here to be involved. Yeldon wasn't active for the first 6 games of Fournette's season. We really saw Fournette take that 3-down role, but he played less than 60% of snaps last week, with Yeldon really eating up 8 targets in the passing game. So even with those workload issues aside, too, we also got to consider this Jags O-line is down 2 starters. Their left guard, Patrick Omameh, as well as their right tackle, Jeremy Parnell, are both out. So a lot of stuff not really going in Fournette's favor.
Yeah, that's fair. So Freeman, I mean, Fournette was not a guy we were going to use in cash anyway. So really, the concern with this ankle injury is that it would limit his effectiveness. So I guess the question is the bump down in ownership. So if he's only 2%, is that intriguing, or is he like sort of off the radar for you in week 11?
He's pretty off the radar for me. I really would not be surprised. And stupid ever to say that the Browns are going to win this game. But like, if there's a type of game that the Browns could win, like this is that type of game, like disgusting weather. They're not going to throw the ball anyway. So the Jaguars defense doesn't really get the benefit of what it's best at. I think it's a game where Fournette and that Jags offense isn't going to have the ball like a huge amount of time. So I don't know. I think it's just like a fade for me, just staying away from the messiness of this entire game.
Yeah. The highest scoring DFS player or position from this game seems like it's going to be the Jaguars defense if we had to make some bets.
One thing people might want to do, I would seriously go look at our player props tool and look at some of the things on the under for this game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, for sure. And maybe that Giants Chiefs game as well. Yeah. We can hit on that in just a second if you guys have any questions, but let's keep on moving on some of these injuries here. Let's go to the Chargers. Rivers is going to play. Ian, any concern about, the situation here?
Rivers cleared the protocol. It was self-reported by him earlier in the week. So it seems like a situation where he kind of made up his own mind. He was going to play through it after he was the one that kind of brought to everyone's attention. But no, I think it's fine. But the problem is here, I think we've seen this Bills run D really be the biggest issue on that team. They got back EJ Gaines for the first time in a few weeks. So Rivers will be getting an improved Bills secondary, and we'll see if the Chargers maybe decide to go run heavy. It's just hard. My biggest issue with Rivers is just he has so many competent weapons, four good wide receivers, 2 good tight ends. We saw Eckler finally get involved in the receiving game last week. So kind of hard to tell where that production is going to go against the Bills' worst run defense.
Very fair. Any thoughts here on this game, Matt? Definitely a weird one with Nathan Peterman now starting for the Bills.
Yeah, I think it's a situation where a lot of people, if they want to play this, the way that they would do it is look to stack probably Gordon with the defense for the Chargers, because that defense has a really nice matchup now going against a rookie quarterback with a suspect offensive line and no really good receiving weapons. It's a nice spot for him. But the running backs in this game, those are the players to focus on.
Yeah, for sure. We have seen quite a bit of line movement on this one, obviously, due to the quarterback situation. Chargers now 7-point favorites over the Bills. All right, let's hit on this Dallas game here. We have quite a few injuries, especially on the Dallas side to hit, and then we can hit on Alshon on the other side. Ian, what's going on with all the guys in this Sunday night game?
Yeah, so 2 main injuries for the Cowboys. First one, left tackle Tyron Smith. We are not expecting him to play. He's still dealing with that groin injury, but it's not going to be Chaz Green this week. So that 6-sack performance by Claiborne got him benched. It's now going to be Byron Bell, who, ideally he cannot give up 6 sacks and that'd be an improvement. But again, this is a journeyman tackle that really, couldn't find another job this offseason. He's been backing up all year. So on the other side of the ball, we have this issue with Sean Lee, who will not be playing. He could even miss more weeks. We've seen the Cowboys defense has really changed from a pretty decent unit to just miserable without Lee in the middle of the defense. So we'll have Jalen Smith there in the middle. He's been okay when he's played limited snaps, but really can struggle in pass coverage when he's out there too much during the game. So a lot of things going the Eagles' way, and that edge rusher tandem of Vinny Curry and Brandon Graham might be the best the Cowboys have seen since Denver. So.
Yeah, Freeman. So you're a Cowboys fan. Going from Tyron Smith to the 3rd string left tackle against Curry and Graham cannot be exciting to think about.
No, this is a horrible spot, and there's not enough sharp money in the world to keep the line from moving. And so, it started at 3.5 and it stayed there, even though it's just getting pounded by the public. And eventually it's moved to 5.5 now. And that might not be far enough. It will probably continue to move throughout the day as more people notice that Sean Lee isn't playing and Tyron Smith isn't playing. It's just going to get hammered by the public. So yeah, not a wonderful spot.
Definitely not. Okay, let's touch on some of these weather situations. Let's go to this Giants game. And I think maybe the more interesting part is, how it's going to affect the Chiefs side of things, because we sort of know with the Giants that Ingram's really the only guy that we might want. But the Chiefs obviously have a lot of guys who were looking as really good fantasy plays here, specifically Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. Obviously, Tyreek Hill with just his ADOT, he's a guy who catches the ball far downfield. We would expect him to be the most affected by wind. Freeman, what are your thoughts on the situation? Like, how does it downgrade the four guys that we're really looking at in Hunt, Smith, Kelce, and Tyreek?
Well, I think it helps Hunt the most in that, Andy Reid sometimes I think can get a little too cute by going away from the run, but I think the weather will encourage more of a run-heavy attack. The thing with Hill is that he's used in multiple ways. So they use him on quick passes just as often as they use him on the deep passes. So I think he still has an advantage in that he is good when he gets the ball very quickly and in space and then can just, run for 50 yards if he has the blockers in front of him. So I think he will still be used in pretty much the same way, probably with just fewer deep pass attempts. Kelce is the one that this would concern me about a little bit more. But not all that much more because he still doesn't run many routes all that far down the field. But as a whole, I think it does diminish the passing game. And so I think that affects Alex Smith the most.
Yeah, I think the general consensus from people is that Alex Smith and Tyreek Hill are going to be the most affected. Yeah. Ian, are you sort of on that train? Maybe just an extra bump up to Hunt? I mean, he's already going to be pretty chalky. We have him now at 31 to 40%. But, going against this bad Giants defense, like if he's the only guy that can be effective because of the weather, that seems like a pretty decent spot here.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a scenario where we could easily imagine Hunt getting extra carries if this pass game is ineffective early on. One big thing is Damon Harrison will be playing on that Giants defensive line. He's one of the better interior run stoppers in the league. So could have been a really extra good situation for Hunt, but he'll have to deal with that. Still, I don't think we should get too cute with this Hunt situation. As this big of a favorite against the Giants D that's, allowed over 160 rushing yards each of the last two games. There's a lot of life with his chances.
One more thing to add into this, there's always the possibility that because Hunt is a good receiver, they use him a little bit more in the receiving game just to negate the impact of the wind. So that's something that could also bump his projection.
All right, sounds good. Let's keep on moving here. Let's talk about a couple questions I'm seeing in chat, a couple interesting spots here. Let's go to the Bucs. Let's talk about Bucs-Dolphins, the game that everyone wants to talk about. This is an interesting game. It started with an over-under of, I think, 40 or 41, and we're having some sharp money on the over, which, Freeman, I don't know if it was because of our content this week, because we were talking about this game was a potential shootout spot. But now with Chiefs-Giants not looking so great, obviously we still have Patriots-Raiders as a shootout spot. And of course, if you're playing on FanDuel, you have the Eagles-Cowboys, but this game ain't looking so bad right now. If you're trying to stack some games up, what are your thoughts here?
I think it's sad that we're in week 11 and that we think that this game somehow doesn't look that bad, but it's just it's like the state of the slate. But yeah, it doesn't look horrible in comparison to some of the other things, because you do have two offenses that like to throw the ball facing two defenses that aren't good in pass defense and funnel production that way. So it could end up being a spot where there's some sneaky production in, smoking Jay Cutler going against Harvard grad Ryan Fitzpatrick. Yeah, sure, let's just stack this game up and then burn all of our money.
Yeah, why not? Let's do it. Ian, what are your thoughts on this game? Is this a sneaky spot for you? Mike Evans is obviously going to be pretty chalky just because of his price and missing last week. But you can get some unique exposure with Fitzpatrick. Deshaun Jackson can obviously do some damage against this secondary. And then you can roll it back with a guy like Devontae Parker, because honestly, both of these defenses, especially in the past, are pretty trash.
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, I think there's an opportunity out wide really on both of these offenses. I know Fitzpatrick had the dud against the Jets last week, but this is probably one of the few better matchups you can get there. And, adding the number one target, Mike Evans, one of the most talented receivers in the league, should theoretically elevate everyone else in that offense. We've seen Deshaun Jackson actually show a higher floor than most years past as kind of a true number two in this offense. And yeah, I think there's a real opportunity kind of for a game stack on the other side with Devontae Parker. He's seen 8 targets in every game this year. And then Jarvis Landry, Vernon Hargreaves, the Buccaneers slot corner, is out. So anytime we can get Jarvis getting fed targets against the backup, that's ideal. And then I'd even say maybe Doug Martin is worth at least a sentence of our time. I mean, the guy hasn't gotten going yet, but no one's taken his touches really. And he's, I know the Dolphins run defense has been better than their pass defense, but pretty bad defense overall. So maybe if everyone's stuck on the wide receivers in this game, we can go a little contrarian with Dougie.
Definitely fair. All right, let's keep on moving here. Let's go to the Washington Redskins. I got a good question here from KV Smooth. He said, "Does Niles Paul being active negatively affect Vernon Davis?" Ian, do you have any thoughts there?
I mean, I'd say preferable Vernon was the only tight end, but it's Jordan Reed that would be the issue of Vernon's target share. Niles is most likely going to be used more so as a blocker, and actually we can maybe see Vernon split out a bit more with Niles there, take over some of those less glorious tight end reps, as you might call them.
Yeah, Friedman, you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. I think it's actually, it's probably just a net move. He might still a target, but I think, as Ian said, he probably does free up Vernon Davis a little bit more to run some more routes. So I think it's probably just about the same.
Sweet. Okay, keep on moving. Let's get to a couple more questions before we get out of here. Ian, you do a run breakdown every week, just talking about offensive line versus defensive line, and get some questions about this run offense with Todd Gurley going against the Vikings defense. What are your thoughts on this matchup?
Don't love it for Gurley's just down by down rushing chances. Really, the Rams offense as a whole, we've seen them just be a lot less effective against some of the better defenses they've faced. And obviously in Minnesota is one of the tougher matchups you could see. I will say Gurley is about as matchup proof as running backs come these days. He's a number one back and carries inside the 5-yard line, and his target share really hasn't been affected by Lance Dunbar's return at all. And he's still racking up targets on a week by week basis. Malcolm Brown, their backup running backs out. So, it's a tough matchup, but there's only so many of these guys, Hunt and Gurley. We already had a Bell play. Zeke's out. So, Gurley's basically getting the biggest workload in the league. So anytime we can maybe get him at reduced ownership, even in a tough matchup, he's one of the few guys that can actually overcome that.
Yeah. It's this game shows whether you DFS or whether you don't, because probably a really interesting real life game, bunch of 7-2 teams, probably pretty good teams here. But it seems like, Matt, that there's not like that much fantasy goodness on either side of the ball.
Yeah, it's a situation where I think for cash, you probably don't want to go with Todd Gurley, but I think you do want exposure in GPPs because he does lead the league in yards from scrimmage and touchdowns from scrimmage. Like he's still in a good spot because he gets so many touches. Not a great matchup, but still a decent spot for him. So yeah, I think GPP exposure is warranted.
All right, let's talk about 2 more games here. Peter in chat is asking me to talk about this Cardinals-Texans game here. A nice one. So I'm not exactly sure who we want to talk about here. Blaine Gabbert is a person playing quarterback. And then Mike Evans, I guess,
he's a human. He exists.
Right. DeAndre Hopkins, I think, is like the most interesting guy in this game. Bruce Ellington, obviously at min price, is going to get some love, but Hopkins, 92 just 3 weeks ago, going against Peterson. We see the Peterson effect with his price of 6-1. Ian, how do you see this game going? I mean, obviously a close spread here of only 2.5, and it's been moving sort of all over the place over the last couple of days. Not a high over under though. So, do you see any like points of fantasy goodness here?
Yeah, it's tough. You're going to have to approach this game knowing that there's a real low chance of a shootout. But I think there's a few opportunities on the Cardinals side and just things to like. I get Adrian Peterson. He's old, but hey, the guy's getting 20-plus carries a game. He's had 2 really good games against really bad defenses, and he's gotten shut down by the Seahawks and Rams. like this Texans run defense, they had pretty good stats on the year, but I think a lot of that was with J.J. Watt and Whitney Merciless involved. They've allowed 30 points per game since those two have been out from the defensive line. So, if Peterson's going to get the opportunities, I think he can still do something with them. Receiving-wise, I do think it's worth mentioning Blaine Gabbert really fed Jeremy Curley the ball in San Francisco last year. He really doesn't have the arm strength to even get the ball too far downfield or outside the hash. So, Larry fits in the slot there for him. Obviously, bigger target than Curley, and he might get all the targets he can handle. Whether or not Gabbert can actually, make those targets fantasy-friendly at all remains to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it looks like Fitzgerald is probably going to get a lot of targets. Like all he can handle. The problem is whether they actually hit his hands.
Yeah, it's fortunately Gabbert doesn't have to soft toss it all that far to get it to fit. So I like the matchup for him. I also bizarrely like the matchup for Hopkins, just because even though he's facing Patrick Peterson, I think he's just going to get fed so many targets because they really have no one else to throw to. Like, are they going to give 10 targets to Bruce Ellington? Like, maybe, but I don't see that happening. Like, I think they're just going to go to Hopkins and hope that he can win.
Yeah, no, that's probably fair. Yeah, and 6-1's just like, I get the price discount, but at a certain point, it might be too much. All right, let's last game before we get out of here. Probably the best one of the week. And we probably need to hit on it just for a second here. The Patriots-Raiders, a lot of fantasy goodness. Matt, you wrote a lot about the running backs, and then Peter Jennings, aka CSU Ram 88, just did a video out this morning where he said that I built 150 Amari lineup, so we can already know exactly what his weekend is going to look like. It may or may not be great. What are your thoughts on this game and Pete's future tilt?
Yeah, Pete is either going to be broke or he's going to own DraftKings after this weekend. But so much to like about this game. Stack it however you want. Like really, any player on any of these teams, I want exposure to. So you have to like Brady going against the Raiders defense that is dead last in the league in pass DVOA. And you have to like what's going on with Amari Cooper and Crabtree going against a Patriots defense that, although it's played better recently, has still given it up to wide receivers. So a lot to like. And then you have Rex Burkhead, who is dirt cheap, and James White, who's also pretty cheap. So there's so many ways that you could go with however you stack this. But this will be a popular game for people to stack.
Yeah. And all the games that are moving down in totals because of the weather, this game is shooting up. Started around 50 and up to 55 in some places. So a lot of fantasy goodness in this one. Ian, before we get out of here, are you on the Amari Cooper train?
I am on the Amari Cooper train this week.
Nice.
I like his usage lately. He's had double-digit snaps in the slot each of the last 3 weeks. He didn't get that once in the first 6 weeks of the season, so they've obviously – taking extra steps to try to get him going, get him the ball. And he's had, I think it's about 5.6 extra targets than Crabtree per game these last 3 weeks. So, we all watch the games. It's pretty clear that Crabtree's had a better season than Cooper. But, if Derek Carr is still insisting on chucking it to Cooper and we can get that matchup against, Jonathan Jones in the slot, by far the weakest link in that Pats secondary, I think that's the route we want to go.
One more thing to add on to this. I can't believe, I guess I can, but I think Cooper is still in cash consideration, especially with the weather issues, with how cheap he is and how bad the Pats defense has been. I'm surprised that wasn't something that came up during the week, that people weren't thinking of him as a cash option.
Yeah. So it looks like we're having a bug here. Ownership on Cooper is not applicable. Do you think that's because Pete broke it? Pete just has too much Cooper.
I have no idea.
Yeah. All right. We are going to end it there. Thank you guys for joining us as always. Good luck this week. Hope to see Fantasy Labs guys at the top of the leaderboards.